Welcome, everyone. I'm Yvette Cabrera. I'm the president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and I am launching the very first chat in a series of chats that I'll be doing with not only NAHJ members, but Latino journalists across the United States, in the hopes of highlighting and featuring the work that we are doing. And today, as our very first guest, I am welcoming a good friend, longtime NAHJ member, Yvonne Latty. Yay, thank you, Yvonne, for being the first. And it's basically a chance to get to know our members. So let's start off, Yvonne, we've known each other for a while now. You've been involved with NAHJ for probably as long as I have, or maybe longer. But
I can't even remember when at this point. It seems like forever.
Yes, and I know for myself it was the mid-90s, but I just always remember you as a presence at our conferences. It was always nice to connect with you and run into you, even though we've always worked on different coasts. I'm on the West Coast in California, and you're on the East Coast. So one of the things I'm hoping to do with these chats is to talk a little bit about how we got into this business. And so I was wondering if we could start with what drew you to journalism. And if you can talk a little bit about how you became a journalist in the first place.
Right. So I grew up in Manhattan, in right on the borders of Harlem, and my mother's she passed away, but was an immigrant from the Dominican Republic, and my father, he was from Jamaica, and he was addicted to newspapers, like totally addicted. Like he would read like 3 papers a day. He was always talking about the news. And then my mom started reading the paper to help her learn English because her English was really shaky and problematic because my father's Spanish wasn't very good. So newspapers were a big part of my life, and the news and talking about the news and what was going on, and the city was bankrupt and this and that. And there was always so much going on in my neighborhood. Like my neighborhood was poor and we were neglected. There was a lot of crime, and my parents wouldn't even really let us out of the house. So I used to look out the window a lot and hang out on the fire escape, and there was always so much news going on. So it was really fascinating just to watch. But I think I suffered from like confidence. And even though I was a big reader and I loved the news, what I saw in newsrooms and on TV were just white people. And so I didn't see how I could do that. So I actually, studied film, which is weird too, because there's not like a lot of Black filmmakers or Latino people. But then I wound up going back to grad school for journalism because I just couldn't shake that feeling that I wanted to write, and that I wanted to tell stories about people who look like me, and that the only way things were going to get better for people in my community was to have people like me in the newsroom who cared.
And what were some of the challenges that you faced both through your schooling and then when you entered the journalism workforce? Because oftentimes we find ourselves as sometimes one of a handful or sometimes the only Latinos in, whether it's a master's program in journalism or in a newsroom itself. Can you talk a little bit about what challenges you faced and also how you overcame them?
Well, I would say it was really hard because I went to NYU for graduate school, and I was the only person of color in my class. In any class I had, there was only one other student of color, and she was on a different track, but we would always say, hey, when we saw each other in the hallway. And I guess the thing that was the hardest was like, when bad things happened in New York and Black or brown people were the ones involved, people in the class would look at me like somehow I was an expert. And I remember with the Central Park jogger, the teenage boys that allegedly raped her, the term they were using was wilding. And a kid in my class asked me, like, so what is it like when I go wilding?
Wow.
I remember that like really, like it really hurt. And then there were things like in my internship was at Newsday, and I'll never forget. I had to go on a story. It was breaking news. I had to hurry up and get there. They told me to take a cab, and I ran outside to grab a cab, and none would stop. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I could do this. Like, I don't know, because I just don't know. Maybe I was right. Maybe it's like too much.
Mhm.
But I kept going, and all my first few jobs, it was the same thing, predominantly white newsrooms, but I worked really, really hard. Like, I always feel like you have to work 4 or 5 times as hard to get the same things. Um, and I kept pushing, and really wonderful things happened to me because I didn't give up. I mean, I really love journalism. I love storytelling. And it's really crazy because that film degree that I thought was, ooh, what a waste. It's completely like propelled my career as a multimedia journalist. So, I taught, taught at NYU for 15 years, the place where I was the only person of color. I ran a graduate program where I was focused on recruiting students of color. And we traveled all over the country on stories about underserved communities. So journalism
Yes.
is powerful.
And I really, and we'll get to that in a moment because I want to delve a little deeper into your work. One question I had just as a follow up is, what factors or people would you say made a difference in the process of you becoming a journalist, both as a student, but also as a young professional? Because at any point you could have stepped away, done something different. Was there anyone that mentored, anyone that guided you, anyone that helped you get through these situations, anyone that made a difference in helping you do the work that you're doing, in helping you stay on track and stick to journalism?
I mean, I would say on the college level, it was definitely my news writing teacher. He was a white man, but I guess I felt like in class he saw me.
Mm-hmm.
It was very like supportive and encouraging on the work I did. So I always felt like, oh, at least I'm catching on to the craft.
Yep.
And I don't know, it was really nice to be in that horrible kind of situation with these students that were just kind of just pure racists, and know that there was someone there who saw me just not as like Yvonne, Black person, but Yvonne, like person, student, budding journalist. So that was a really big thing because I think that propelled me forward. And I would say in newsrooms, the biggest things that helped me were my friends, and they came in all colors.
Mhm.
I got a lot of support from people that were just in the, sitting across from me, sitting next to me. We supported each other. Here in Philadelphia, when I worked for the Daily News, Marisol Bello, who, we worked together. She's Dominican, reading each other's leads, being out on stories. And, sometimes the editors were not very helpful because they didn't understand. And knowing that you could call someone who was from a community similar to yours and just say, oh my God, I'm dying out here, and have them support you. And that came in all colors too. Like I had so many, Barbara Lake, or so many good friends at papers I've worked for that have really like lifted me up when I felt crushed. And that continued on in my academic career. So kind of very similar, who's sitting next to you, who's going to support you, who's going to reach their hand to lift you up. And that hand it comes in all colors to lift you up, and it comes in all colors to knock you down.
Right. And it can make all the difference in the world in getting through those days when it's so tough. I mean, journalism as it is a tough field to survive in, even more so when you're a journalist of color. And you mentioned being seen. Can you just elaborate a little bit about how it makes a difference in the work that you do when you have people around you who see you for who you are and what you bring to the table? Because that's often what I hear from our members, is that they get into newsrooms and then they hit a wall. They make, they'll pitch a story about the communities that they know because of where they come from. And it just falls on deaf ears. And so they feel like I'm here, but I'm not being heard, I'm not being seen. So can you talk about what that means for you as an Afro-Latina?
For me, it's always been a thread of, through my life of, I could be the most talented person in the room, but I would be put on the story that was like not, the homicide, it was very like, I found the newsrooms to be very like, they stereotype you and then they just stick you to do the same thing. They don't promote you. They don't put your stories up for awards. But all it takes sometimes is like, you can be doing a story that you can think is like, oh, this is such an eye roll, and you can turn it into something like really magical, like wherever you go, especially if you work in urban areas or in areas where there's people of color, there's so many stories you can do that they can assign you to do one thing, and then you could find something like really amazing in the mundane. And I got really, really good at that when I worked in the suburbs. And then in Philly, it just became even easier. If you do the work, you got to do the work, and you've got to like be open to the edits, and you got to consume a lot of media, and always work on your skill. Read a lot, read a lot. It's not like just because you get the degree, things are gonna get handed to you. If anything, it's harder when you're
Yep.
someone that looks like me.
Yep. Okay, so and then speaking of the work, I was wondering if you can talk about, and I don't want to call them favorite pieces, but if you can talk about documentaries that you've done, stories that you've done, you've written books. Can you talk about, give us some examples of work that you've done that have really resonated for you and also resonated in the communities that you've covered?
Well, my first documentary was Sacred Poison. It was about uranium contaminated water in Navajo Nation and how the people were drinking it. And that was a really big one for me because I'd never done documentary before. And working in Navajo Nation is really difficult because there's no GPS, there's no roads. I mean, it's really intense. And it was also really humbling for me because I've come from a place where, things for Black people, you're oppressed. If you're Latino, you're oppressed, and it's so hard. And then you go there and it's like 1,000 zillion times harder, where even water is like, they were drinking poison basically. So that was a big thing. And that did really well in the festivals. And I just learned a lot about documentary filmmaking, making it. I guess, my book, We Were There, the book I wrote about Black vets, was really impactful for me, really humbling and really helpful to me in terms of like pride and stuff. It was also a wonderful challenge to travel around the country and interview people who have such incredible stories that haven't been told. And then I'm going to skip to the podcast I did for Latino USA on my mom. My mom, who's Dominican, she died of Alzheimer's disease last year. And I did a podcast for Latino USA about her called Alzheimer's in Color. And it was basically our story. And I could get emotional talking about it. And it's probably the best thing I ever did. But also like kind of beautiful and hard at the same time. And then now I have this new job at Temple University's Logan Center for Urban Investigative Reporting. I am the new director, and we just completed a podcast called Stop and Frisk, Revisit or Resist. Philadelphia has a gun violence epidemic, and people are desperate for solutions. And there was conversation over the summer about beefing up stop and frisk, which, like all of us know, especially after the George Floyd murder, that I was hopeful that there would be new ways of policing and keeping people safe. But not much has happened on that score. And so with WHYY and actually working with Sarah Glover, the former NABJ president, who's now the VP of News at WHYY, we put this podcast together. It's 5 episodes. I think it's pretty incredible. It's a lot of community voices. it was very traumatic because I've been stopped before by cops. I've had a lot of like not great incidents involving car stops.
Mhm.
And so to hear people talk about their experiences that are like way worse than mine, it's just, it can be very traumatic. There's a lot of trauma in journalism. That's like the one thing I think about all the time, like wellness, self-care, you know, you know. That's the one thing I'd say. It's no joke out there. And especially the cool thing about my job now in Philly is like I am reporting again. I'm out a lot. And I love, love, love being out. I just absolutely love it. It's the thing I miss the most. But you know, it's really sad to see how little things change for communities of color in cities.
Yeah.
Oh, and then I guess my last project that I love so much was doing a podcast for the Southern Poverty Law Center called Sounds Like Hate, where I traveled all over the country with the most amazing co-host, looking at white supremacy, honestly. And we were on the border, and you know, we did a lot of stories there, and it was really, really intense and hard, but it feels so good to be doing something that could possibly help the conversation, you know?
And I mean, one of the things I often say for us as journalists of color is that we go into our communities to do these stories, and we don't walk away from these stories. We a lot of times, because we have grown up in these same neighborhoods, we know the issues, we carry that on our shoulders. We don't just like turn on and off and move on to the next story. And so I'm wondering how you, with all of these issues that you've tackled, from uranium water contamination to stop and frisk, these are heavy issues. How do you get through the process of doing this work, and realizing that the systemic issues that we're facing as a country don't just get fixed overnight? And you're trying to illuminate these issues through your work. So I'm just wondering if you have any advice for young journalists who are doing this work as well, and are trying to figure their way through not just the stories, the work, but to get through as people to survive this.
Yeah, it's you know, like when I worked in the newsroom, it was very much like, you know, hold it in, and you know, next tomorrow's another day, and you know, you just, I know people that drank, I know people that got involved in, you know, relationships they shouldn't have. You know what I mean? Like people were always looking for like ways out of it. And I did a book about Iraq war vets, and I would say that book broke me. It was really, really tough to, you know, the war was still going on. These were really recent experiences, not like we were there where it happened, you know, 40 years ago, whatever. And it really broke me. I felt so awful after I wrote that book. And then it became a play, and then I became addicted to the play and was off Broadway, and I would go and see it all the time. And it was the voices over and over in my head.
Mhm.
And I would say I fell apart, you know, I became depressed, I had anxiety. And then I realized, you know, that I had to take care of myself because, you know, I have two daughters and they were expensive. And I had my mom at the time, and, you know, I couldn't just like become a basket case. So like I got really into weird things like CrossFit for a while, bike
Wow.
riding and exercise. And I wish like I, you know, I mean, at one point I lost like 50 pounds. I mean, I became like, and it really, really helped me. And I used to think like when I used to like work out, like something I did CrossFit pre-COVID, just like for 1 hour, it was so hard. It was so hard. I couldn't think about my mother's Alzheimer's. I couldn't think about anything but like just getting through. And then once I was through, I just felt like a relief, you know, yoga, meditation. I also think it's really important to be kind to yourself and to be okay if you make a mistake. Like I tell my students all the time, it's okay. You know, mistakes make you better. What's a mistake anyway? You know? But in the podcast, in the last podcast, Stop and Frisk, like, you know, I definitely felt like I was having, you know, some tough moments. And I just thought to myself, like, I think about this a lot, like, you know, I'm so lucky to be in this position, you know, the position that, considering like where I came from, this is like, I'm like, whew, you know what I mean? It's like, oh my God, you know, I have to be strong for all the people that don't have a voice, who don't have an opportunity to even tell their story. I got to keep my shit together, you know? And then, you know, when I tell the story, even if it's hard to tell, I just feel like, you know, like telling a story about my mom, it like really took a lot out of me. But so many people like responded who had mothers and fathers with Alzheimer's disease. And it made me feel like I did something to help. And that's the beauty of journalism. Can't think of many jobs where you get to do something different every day. You get to meet really interesting people. Um, and it's like, it's fun to write, it's fun to produce, it's fun to do audio, it's fun to make videos. It's cool, you know? But the mental health thing is real, and you you, if you need therapy, I've been in and out of therapy. It's like, if you feel you need it, you know, go in, and then when you're done, you leave, you know, you feel like you're okay, then you move out. But it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. And if you can't do something, then just say, you know, something, I can't do that.
Yeah.
What's
Yep.
the worst thing that's gonna happen? This guy ain't gonna fall in.
Right. Yep. Learning how to say no for your own health and well-being.
Yeah.
Yeah. When, you know, I just wanted to mention quickly that, during the pandemic, because I cover environmental justice issues, the water contamination issue in the Navajo Nation came up, and I connected with Earl Tooley. And
Oh,
one of the first things he told me was, I'm going to send you a link to The Sacred Poison by Yvonne Latty. Do you know Yvonne? And I was like, I know Yvonne.
I love
It was a nice full circle moment, but also speaking to the issues of connecting with people, and because I did actually go out to Blue Gap where he lives to tell a story about the process that he was going to try to raise awareness about a compensation act for uranium miners, and people who've been exposed, and being there, connecting with him, and also listening to him. He's amazingly eloquent about the stories that he tells about his connection to the land. And so I got so much, I was very fulfilled in the process of just even hearing and listening and then connecting in person. And so I know exactly what you're talking about. You know, despite all of the hurdles, you know, that we go through to tell stories and to do work in a way that is respectful of the communities that we cover, accurate, factual, that what we get back is 100%, you know, why we're in this business, because there is so much that you get back from being able to tell those stories. So so I really it was great to be able to connect on that level, and also to have a sort of like connection with work that you were doing, work that you know, my fellow journalists are doing. um so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your new position. Could you talk about, just give a little bit more detail about the investigations that you're working on and the work that you're doing there? Because that is definitely one area where we know there's so few Latinos on investigative teams in newsrooms across the country. It's an area where NAHJ is doing work. We have a task force addressing that issue as well. Can you talk about that work and what you're hoping to achieve through that position?
so the Logan Center for Urban Investigative Reporting is brand new. It started with me in July, and our mission is to do community-based investigative reporting. So the way investigative reporting works, to me, the way I see it, is you have like, you know, a group of white reporters, and they'll like sort of like find data points, and then they'll go into the community, and they'll find people to match the data points, and then they'll write a really big story, and then you never see them again. And we don't know if it helped or it doesn't help because there's no real connection. So at the Logan Center, the thing that I'm really experimenting with is this idea of like getting the stories from the community and then finding the data points to match what they say, and then going in hard, and in many cases using them to as almost partners with me, as well as having professional media partners. So we did the Stop and Frisk podcast just based on you know, the gun violence. I had been meeting with a lot of leaders and people that were talking about the shootings and the violence and what to do. Then I saw the thing with you know, the city councilman. I had met with a WHYY reporter. Next thing you know, we're like experimenting with this podcast. But the coolest thing about it was how incredibly deep we went into the community to really, really look at the impact of Stop and Frisk, the history of it in Philadelphia and where it is now, as well as all the violence. I'm also working on a documentary focusing on the media and gun violence survivors, as well as people who have lost people, and how the way we've covered it has traumatized them. It's like been a second trauma. So that's what I'm working on now, and that's in partnership with our local ABC. We're also working on a big project on education disparities. You know, it's one city, but schools in neighborhoods that are predominantly white or affluent, you know, they have amazing resources and it's wonderful. And then the schools in the poorer areas, it's like, you know, a 2% reading level in the 3rd grade. It's like basically tragic. I mean, kids, you know, if you could get the kids through the school year surviving, it's like a plus. So, you know, our partner for that is Billy Penn, which is a division of WHYY. And we also, students work on projects with us, community members on the documentary. The voice of it is a man who was shot in the head when he was 10 years old. He's basically the one taking us through and connecting him to his community of survivors. And it's really, really powerful. So we have, and then we're going to do something on sports. I mean, we have like, there's so much stuff. There's so much to do. I mean, my big thing is worrying about like, you know, I can't work 7 days a week.
Yes.
But there's a lot, and it's really cool because since I am a woman of color, like I do see the world differently. I mean, I can't, it's like, you can't help it. It's like how I see things is just different. And that's why you need diversity in the newsroom, because it's different ways of looking at the same thing. And if you all work together, it can be an incredible thing. But my big thing is really about like, you know, telling stories that aren't getting told. You know, I really believe so much in diversity. I don't know. It's challenging. It's been very challenging for me in my life, you know. So being Afro-Latina is not, I would not call it a cakewalk by any stretch of the imagination, because you're very much in two worlds, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, and I want to use this as an opportunity to talk about your work on the Afro-Latino Task Force that the NAHJ recently launched. Can you talk a little bit about what the goals of the task force are, the work that has been done so far? There was a great panel at the NAHJ NABJ convention this past summer, and if you can talk a little bit about your experiences and how you're tapping those experiences to inform the work that you're doing on the task force.
So, you know, I would say for the Afro-Latino Task Force, you know, like our number one thing is really visibility. I mean, if you go to any NAHJ convention, most of the Latinos there are white, and that's just kind of reflects America more than I think it's anything personal or like a vendetta. I think it's just a sad realization that there's just not a lot of Afro-Latino journalists. I mean, and that's just the sad truth of it. And so for me, and I think for the other members, like, we're really focused on visibility and just letting people know that we're here and that it's a safe space and that there's so much that NHJ can offer. We have a scholarship. It's pretty big for an Afro-Latino student. And, I have to say the members of the task force are really great and they're really easy to work with and they really care. And, if anybody, has suggestions or ideas, feel free to contact me at yvonne.latty@gmail. But yeah, I mean, it was really interesting because I think it all came about because of like In the Heights, and it's really funny too, because I saw In the Heights and I saw it with my daughters, and I was really like happy that like, people were dancing in Washington Heights, which is where I went to high school. So I'm really familiar with the area. And they actually were like, "There's no Black people." And I'm like, oh, well, that's Hollywood.
Yeah.
But they weren't willing to accept that. And I think that's a beautiful thing about younger people, is that they're willing to fight the fight. And so I'm excited. I think there's a lot that task force can do. But I think the most important thing is we need more people.
Yes.
It's definitely a different experience. When you're Black in this country, it's not easy. And in some ways, it's so amazingly great that through social media, we're seeing the trauma that Black men and women face all the time and the fears, but at the same time, it's traumatizing and triggering. So, it can be really nice to be around people who understand that about you, and NHJ is not that place. So it would be nice to have that component in it.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I always say is the first step is acknowledging the void. And the second step is trying to figure out a path forward. And we can't figure that out unless we have these conversations. So I'm truly thankful for the work that the task force is doing in bringing those, that dialogue forward. And then hopefully trying to address the issue of pipeline support, mentoring. What do we need to do on the front end to make sure that the numbers that, that we, as you have said, they're so low, we need to address that. And how can we do that? So hopefully we'll be able to do it together, Yvonne. The last thing I wanted to ask you was advice to young journalists who are either in the business right now or are thinking about getting into journalism. Is there anything that you would offer to them as far as advice, or maybe thinking back to yourself as you were considering going into the business? Is there anything you would have done differently? Any advice that you would give yourself?
Wow. It's so interesting because I kind of like the way my career went. I definitely had some bumps and lumps, and there were times when I thought to give it up, to be honest. I mean, in a way I did, because I moved to academia. I don't know. I think if I could talk to myself when I was that kid on the fire escape on 108th Street, I would just say don't give up. This is your movie, which I actually do tell my daughter. It's your movie. You're the director. You know what I mean? Don't let bad characters play too big a role in your movie. I guess for me, I think it's be strong, be fearless. You're great. Don't be afraid. You can do it. It's important work. It's really, really important work. You can make a difference. You can make a difference every single day, and that's, I think journalism is magical, to be honest. I really think it is. I mean, that might be really corny. But I think it's magical. I think it opens so many doors in the experiences you have, the people that you meet, the Earl Tulleys of the world.
Yeah.
What other job You know, so don't let anyone take that away from you because of your ethnicity or your race or the way you look or no, 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 no. It's your movie. It's your movie. You're the director.
I love that. I love that. So, thank you for sharing your email. If there are any members that want to get in touch with you, about the task force, about your work, at Temple, anything else, advice on how to survive in the business. Can you repeat it again?
Yeah, I guess the easy one is just, Yvonne, YVONNE dot LATTY @gmail.
And speaking of our young generation, I'm gonna wrap up the chat just by mentioning two events that NHJ has coming up. One is on February 11th at Columbia University. It's a student summit. And we're really, really excited to partner with Columbia on this. The second one is also a student summit. It's on February 25th at USC. And the idea is to give our young journalists on both coasts a chance to talk about, number one, connect with each other and connect with folks in the business. We're going to have lots of interesting workshops, all with the aim of ensuring that transition from college to the professional world happens. And so I'm hoping to meet everyone. I will be attending both of them. I'm hoping to meet our student journalists there. We're really excited about it. And if you need more information about that, just go to nhj.org. We have information on both summits there. So thank you, Yvonne, for being my first chat.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and
Nice to see you.
and I'll see you in person, hopefully in Miami, which is our other upcoming event this July. So one way or another, we'll see each other. We'll cross paths as we have over our lives. So thank you, Yvonne. We'll take
All right.
care.
Sounds good. Bye.